She wiped tables, served commuters, took orders from construction workers and nurses, and men who smelled like last night's regrets. She smiled when appropriate, apologized when necessary, absorbed insults without reflecting them back. People mistook that for weakness. They always did. Ruby Morales was 32 years old, drowning in medical debt left behind by a mother who had died too early and too expensively. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a nail salon that never quite lost the smell of acetone. She sent money every month to a younger brother who believed she was doing fine. She was not doing fine, but she was paying attention. She spoke 4 languages fluently: Spanish from home, English from survival, Italian from her mother's stories and years of listening, French from night classes she never finished but never forgot. She read contracts the way other people read menus. That habit came from a past she didn't advertise. Before Bellini's, Ruby had worked as a legal assistant. Not glamorous, not powerful, but close enough to see how truth bent under pressure and how often it snapped when pushed too far. She'd left when her firm defended the wrong man and called it strategy. Silence, she learned then, could be complicity. That lesson followed her behind the counter. Robert Moretti met with people every morning. Quiet meetings. Short ones. Men and women who sat across from him as if the table were a witness stand. Ruby served them all. She noticed who trembled and who didn't. She noticed which words made people swallow. She noticed patterns. One morning, a man slid an envelope across the table, fingers shaking. His voice pitched high, fast, rehearsed. "This is everything we discussed, Mr. Moretti." Signed, approved. Ruby set the espresso down and paused half a second too long. Robert didn't look at the man. He looked at the cup, then at Ruby. "Is it burnt?" he asked. The question landed like a blade. The man froze. Ruby met Robert's gaze. Calm, measured. "No," she said. But it was rushed. Robert nodded once. "Then we wait." The man's face drained of color. "Sir, the deadline is flexible," Robert replied. "When the truth isn't." The man left 10 minutes later without the envelope. Ruby watched Robert watch her as she wiped the table. Not curiosity, evaluation. That morning, she understood something dangerous. Robert Moretti trusted her judgment, not because she spoke, because she didn't, unless it mattered. That trust grew quietly. A glance, a question about the weather that wasn't about the weather. A pause that invited truth without demanding it. Ruby never abused it. Until the morning the lawyers walked in. They arrived at 7:43. 4 of them. Expensive suits, polished shoes, legal confidence sharpened into arrogance. Behind them, 4 bodyguards fanned out. Big men, disciplined, hands near their jackets. The café went silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Cups froze halfway to lips. Even the espresso machine seemed to hesitate. Ruby felt it before she saw it. Power had entered the room, and it wasn't Robert's. The lead lawyer smiled like someone who had already won. "Mr. Moretti," he said loudly, deliberately, "we need to speak. Now." Robert didn't stand. He didn't smile. He looked at Ruby. "Another coffee?" he asked. She nodded and turned toward the machine. That's when she heard the word that changed everything. Fraud. Spoken just loudly enough to be public, just softly enough to be deniable. Ruby's hand tightened on the portafilter. Fraud wasn't a threat. It was an accusation. And in that room, in that city, it was a death sentence if spoken carelessly. She turned back. The lawyers were spreading documents across the table like weapons. The bodyguards shifted closer. Phones were already out, pretending not to record. Robert's gaze hardened, but he didn't speak. Ruby stepped forward. She hadn't planned to. Her body moved before fear could catch up. "That document," she said, voice steady, clear, carrying, "isn't enforceable." The room stopped breathing. 4 lawyers stared at her. 4 bodyguards took a half step forward. Robert raised one finger. They froze. He looked at Ruby, not angry, not surprised. Listening. "Why?" he asked. Ruby swallowed, because silence this time would be immoral. Ruby felt every eye in the cafe land on her like weight. The lawyer stared as if a chair had spoken. One of the bodyguards shifted his stance, hand brushing the inside of his jacket. The owner of Bellini's peeked out from the kitchen, face pale, already calculating how fast a business could be shut down if the wrong man felt embarrassed. Robert Moretti didn't raise his voice. He didn't move at all. He simply leaned back slightly in the booth and repeated calmly, "Why?" He laughed, a short, dismissive sound meant to put Ruby back where she belonged. "And you are?" he asked. Ruby didn't answer him. She kept her eyes on Robert. Because Clause 17, she said, references a jurisdiction that no longer recognizes the arbitration body named here. It was dissolved last year. Quietly. If this goes to court, the entire agreement collapses. The lawyer's smile flickered. "That's not accurate," he said sharply. Ruby nodded once. "It is." And the revision date on page 4 was backdated. Whoever drafted this assumed no one would notice. The cafe was so quiet Ruby could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Robert studied her the way a chess player studies the board after an unexpected move. "How do you know this?" he asked. She hesitated. This was the edge, the place where truth either held or got you crushed. "I used to work in contract review," Ruby said, "before here." The lead lawyer slammed his palm on the table. "This is absurd. Mr. Moretti, you're going to take legal advice from a waitress?" Robert's eyes never left Ruby. "Are you certain?" he asked her. She met his gaze. Yes. No drama, no flourish. Certainty didn't need decoration. Robert turned his head slightly. "Everyone out," he said. The lawyers blinked. "Excuse me?" "You," Robert said, pointing, not at the lawyers, but at the bodyguards. "Outside, now." They hesitated. Robert looked at them. They moved. The lawyers protested, voices overlapping. But Robert stood then, slowly, deliberately. The movement alone commanded silence. "You brought accusations into my morning," he said. "You tried to do it publicly. That tells me everything I need to know." He gathered the documents, slid them into a neat stack, and handed them to Ruby. "Coffee," he said to her. "Then read." Ruby took the papers with hands that barely trembled. She poured the coffee, served it, returned. Robert sat back down, unbothered, as if his entire empire wasn't being challenged by 4 men who thought paper outweighed truth. Ruby flipped to page 17. She pointed. "This reference," she said, "it's invalid. And this one, page 9. This language implies consent under duress. That alone is enough to void it." One lawyer's face had gone gray. "This agreement was approved by," he started. "Someone who wanted it rushed," Ruby finished quietly. Robert watched the lawyers unravel. "One by one. You will leave," he said, "and you will come back tomorrow, alone, with the person who authorized this." "And if we don't?" the lead lawyer asked. Robert's voice dropped. "Then today becomes the least of your problems." They left. Not loudly, not triumphantly. Defeated men rarely do. The bell above the door rang again. Only then did the cafe exhale. Ruby realized she was still holding the papers. Robert looked at her. "Sit," he said. She hesitated. "I should get back to—" "Sit," he repeated. Not a command. A request waited with consequence. She sat. For the first time in 3 years, Ruby Morales sat across from Robert Moretti. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She shook her head. "Yes, I did." "Why?" She chose her words carefully. "Because they were lying, and because they were counting on your reputation to silence anyone who noticed." Robert smiled faintly. Not amused, impressed. "They underestimated you," he said. "They always do," Ruby replied before she could stop herself. A pause. Then, softer. "Why didn't you?" "Because people who work the hardest to be invisible He said, "Usually see the most." He stood. "Finish your shift." He said, "I'll have my driver bring you somewhere safe tonight." Her spine stiffened. "I don't need protection." "I know," he said. "This isn't about need, it's about choice." She met his eyes. "I choose to go home." Robert nodded. "Very well." He paused at the door. "Ruby," he said. She looked up. "You changed the board today." The door closed behind him. Ruby sat there, heart pounding, knowing one irreversible truth: nothing about her life would ever be small again. And she hadn't asked for any of it. The city didn't explode the way Ruby expected. There were no sirens, no men waiting outside her apartment, no sudden disappearance of Bellini's café. Instead, the world shifted the way ice does before it cracks. Soft sounds, invisible stress. The next morning, Ruby arrived at 5:30 as usual. The owner watched her with a new kind of fear, the kind that pretends to be politeness. You okay?" he asked. "Yes," Ruby said, tying her apron. He nodded too fast. "Good, good." At 6:12, the bell rang. Robert walked in alone. Same coat, same calm, same seat. But the cafe felt different now, like everyone knew something they weren't allowed to say. Ruby brought the coffee. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Robert replied. He took a sip. "You were right." She nodded. "I know." That made him smile, just slightly. "They didn't sleep last night," he continued. "The man who authorized the contract tried to leave the country." At 3 a.m., Ruby's hand paused on the table. "Tried?" she asked. Robert tilted his head. Emphasis on tried. She exhaled slowly. "Then they were desperate." "They still are," he said, "which makes them dangerous." She straightened. "Then why are you here alone?" "Because if they move now," Robert said calmly, "they'll reveal themselves." Ruby studied his face. "You're bait," she said. He met her eyes. "So are you." The word landed heavy. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly. "No," Robert agreed. "You didn't." A man entered the cafe then, young, nervous, pretending to scroll on his phone while his eyes cataloged exits. Ruby noticed the earpiece immediately. Robert noticed Ruby noticing. "They're watching," she murmured. "Yes." "From who?" Robert didn't answer right away. "From inside," he said finally. That was worse. The enemy wasn't rival gangs or old grudges. It was his own structure. The lawyers returned that afternoon. Just one this time. No bodyguards. He didn't sit. "I was told to apologize," the man said stiffly. Robert gestured to the booth. "Then sit." "Your contract," Robert said, "was designed to transfer assets to a holding company I don't control." The lawyer swallowed. "That wasn't my understanding." "That's why understanding matters," Robert said. The man glanced at Ruby. "With respect? This is highly irregular." Ruby folded her hands. "Fraud usually is." Robert's eyes never left the lawyer. "Who ordered it?" Robert waited. "Speak," he said. The man broke. "A board member," he said. "Family adjacent. Someone you trust." Ruby felt the word before it was spoken. "Your cousin," she said quietly. The lawyer nodded. The cafe felt colder. Robert closed his eyes for a brief moment, not in pain, but in calculation. "Go," he said, "and tell him I'll see him tonight." The lawyer fled. Ruby stood. "I should get back to work." Robert didn't stop her. That evening, a black sedan waited across from her apartment. She stopped. The driver stepped out. "Miss Morales, Mr. Moretti asked me to make sure you got home safely." She hesitated, then nodded. On the ride, the city passed like a memory already fading. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. The driver glanced at her in the mirror. "Because you told him the truth, when lying would have been safer." At her building, she paused. "Tell him something," she said. "Yes." "Tell him I won't be used." The driver smiled faintly. "He already knows." That night, Ruby couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the word cousin. Blood was the most dangerous contract of all. Robert didn't come to Bellini's the next morning. That alone was enough to make Ruby uneasy. The cafe buzzed with rumor disguised as small talk. Two construction workers whispered too loudly. A woman at the counter asked if the owner thought the place was safe now. No one said Robert's name. Power rarely gets named until it's gone. At 8:30, Ruby's phone vibrated in her pocket. Unknown number. Mr. Moretti requests your presence this afternoon. You may decline. Ruby stared at the screen. Choice. He'd meant that. She typed back. Where? The response came instantly. His office. Noon. She didn't answer. At 11:45, she clocked out early for the first time in years. Robert's office occupied the top floor of a building with no signage, no logos, no announcements of importance. The elevator required a key card and a code, and still someone watched her the entire ride up. The doors opened to quiet. Not sterile, not cold, controlled. Robert stood near the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. He looked less like a kingpin here and more like a man who carried too much responsibility for too long. You came, he said. I said I'd choose, Ruby replied. I didn't say which way. He smiled. Fair. He gestured to a table covered in documents. My cousin, he said, has been bleeding my organization slowly, laundering control away from me, using legality as camouflage. Ruby skimmed a page. Her jaw tightened. This isn't sloppy, she said. It's deliberate and patient. Yes, Robert agreed. He assumed I wouldn't notice until it was irreversible. She looked up. Why are you showing me this? Because you already interrupted something irreversible, Robert said. And because you won't lie to me. Ruby set the papers down. You don't need a waitress. You need an auditor. I need a conscience, Robert corrected. That stopped her. I'm not yours, she said immediately. I know, he replied. That's why I'm asking. She crossed her arms. What are you asking? Help me expose him, Robert said. Publicly. Cleanly. Without collateral damage. Ruby laughed once, sharp. You're a crime boss. Yes. You want clean? I want just, he said. She searched his face for manipulation. Found none. What happens if I say no, she asked. You walk away, Robert said. Alive, unharmed, unfollowed. And if I say yes, you set the rules. Silence stretched. My conditions, Ruby said slowly, are non-negotiable. I wouldn't expect anything else. No violence, she said. Not for this. No intimidation. No disappearances. Robert nodded. Agreed. No retaliation against people who cooperate. Agreed. And if I decide to stop at any point, you stop, Robert finished. She exhaled. This doesn't make you good, she said. I know, he replied, but it might make me less wrong. Ruby looked at the city through the glass. She thought of her mother, of contracts that destroyed lives quietly, of silence dressed up as survival. Okay, she said. Robert inclined his head. Then we begin, he said. Together. Ruby underestimated how quickly proximity to power changes the air around you. By the end of the week, she no longer entered rooms unnoticed. Not because people recognized her name, no one did, but because Robert's presence bent attention toward her like gravity. Men paused when she spoke. Women watched her more closely. Silence followed her words now, not because she demanded it, but because it arrived on its own. She hated it. They worked out of a quiet conference room, overlooking the river. No guards inside, no phones allowed. Robert honored that without comment. Ruby spread documents across the table, color-coded, with sticky tabs she paid for herself. This is where he hid it, she said, tapping a ledger. Not in shell companies. In compliance. Robert raised an eyebrow. Explain. Everyone expects corruption to look illegal, Ruby said. But the safest crimes look obedient. He used regulations as cover, created a maze so complex no one bothered to walk it. Robert leaned back. And you walked it. I've been walking mazes my whole life, she replied. He smiled at that. Not charm, recognition. They worked long hours. Ruby still took her shifts at Bellini's in the mornings. She refused to quit. I won't become dependent, she told him flatly. You won't, Robert agreed. And I won't ask you to. That respect, that line he never crossed, was what made this dangerous. Because trust, when chosen freely, cuts deeper than fear. The pressure came quietly. A neighbor asked questions. A man on the subway stared too long. A voicemail with no message but heavy breathing. Ruby documented everything. Robert never dismissed her concerns. You want protection? He asked once. I want awareness, she said. He gave her both. The midpoint came on a Thursday night. Ruby was halfway through tracing fund transfers when she froze. This, she said slowly, this isn't just theft. Robert moved closer. What is it? She turned the screen toward him. He's funding a political campaign. Off the books. Using your infrastructure. Robert's jaw tightened. Which campaign? Ruby hesitated. The one proposing mandatory asset seizures. Silence slammed into the room. They're planning to take you down, she continued, voice steady, and rebuild without you. Robert closed his eyes. Not in anger, in acceptance. He's willing to burn everything, Ruby said, including innocent people. Robert looked at her then, something raw breaking through the armor. Will you stay? He asked. Not as a command, as a question. Ruby thought of the exit, of anonymity, of safety. Then she thought of the waitress she used to be, silent, watching harm unfold, because speaking cost too much. Yes, she said, but we do this my way. He nodded. Always. They prepared for exposure. Not violence. Truth. Ruby drafted a report so airtight it terrified even her. Every claim footnoted. Every transfer traced. Every witness protected. When the day came, it wasn't a gunfight. It was a meeting. Boardroom, cameras, lawyers, politicians. Ruby stood beside Robert, not behind him. When accusations flew, she didn't raise her voice. She raised evidence, and the room broke. The boardroom was designed to intimidate. Long table, glass walls, city skyline stretched behind it like a promise only a few were allowed to keep. The men seated around it wore power the way others wore perfume. Subtle, expensive, unmistakable. Ruby felt none of it. She stood with her notes arranged neatly in front of her, hands steady, spine straight. Robert sat beside her, not at the head of the table. That choice alone unsettled them. His cousin Marco smiled too easily. This is unnecessary, Marco said. Family business should stay private. Ruby tilted her head. Then you shouldn't have made it public policy. A few heads turned. Marco's eyes flicked to her, dismissive. And you are? She's the reason you're still sitting, Robert said calmly. Choose your next words carefully. The meeting began like all false trials do, with confidence. Marco's lawyers spoke first. Long explanations, technical jargon, moral fog. Ruby waited. When it was her turn, she didn't stand immediately. She let the silence stretch. People grew uncomfortable when certainty refused to rush. This organization, Ruby said finally, was dismantled without a single gun being drawn. That should concern you. She clicked the remote. Numbers filled the screen. Transfers, dates, jurisdictions. This isn't theft, she continued. It's reallocation. You redirected power while pretending to obey it. Marco scoffed. That's an interpretation. Ruby nodded. Here's another. She displayed an email chain, then a bank record, then a recorded call. Each one landed like a measured strike. You funded a campaign designed to dismantle the very protections keeping this structure intact, Ruby said, not to improve it, to replace it, with yourself at the center. The room shifted. This wasn't rumor. This was anatomy. Marco leaned forward. You expect us to believe a waitress over... I expect you, Ruby interrupted softly, to recognize patterns. She gestured to the room. Every person here has benefited from silence at some point. You know what guilt looks like when it hides behind legality. A murmur ran through the table. Robert remained silent. That mattered more than if he'd spoken. Your mistake, Ruby said, turning to Marco, was assuming no one would read the fine print, that no one would care enough to follow it all the way through. Marco's smile cracked. You think this ends me? He snapped. You think truth alone has power here? Ruby met his eyes. No, she said. I think choice does. She turned to the others. You can bury this, she said. Protect him. Protect yourselves. Continue as you are. She paused. Or you can separate from him now, publicly, cleanly, and survive what comes next. Someone stood, then another. Not loyalty. Marco's face drained of color. You can't do this, he whispered. To Robert, to the room, to fate. Robert finally spoke. She already did. Security entered. Not Robert's men. Internal compliance. Marco was escorted out without spectacle. The room exhaled. Ruby felt the weight lift and settle somewhere new. Afterward, in the quiet hallway, Robert stopped her. You dismantled him without destroying us, he said. That's rare. I dismantled a lie, Ruby replied. The rest was inevitable. He hesitated. I won't ask you to stay, he said. You've done more than I ever had the right to expect. She looked at him. Good, she said. Because I'm not done yet. Power doesn't collapse loudly. It rearranges itself in whispers. The days after the boardroom meeting were quiet in a way Ruby had never experienced. No retaliation, no sudden disappearances, no violence in the streets. That silence meant success. Marco Moretti's name vanished from letterheads, boards, and donation lists. His allies distanced themselves publicly, calling the exposure deeply concerning, while privately scrubbing their own trails. Robert's organization didn't fracture, it recalibrated. And that, Ruby realized, was more dangerous than chaos. She returned to Bellini's the following Monday. Same apron, same counter. Same espresso machine, humming like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. The owner hovered less. Customers watched her more. A few whispered, "Isn't that her?" At 6:12, the bell rang. Robert didn't come. For the first time in years, his booth stayed empty. Ruby felt something tighten in her chest and hated herself for noticing. At 7, her phone buzzed. Take the day off. R. She stared at the message. Choice again. She typed back. No. At 7:30, he walked in. No entourage, no attention-grabbing entrance. Just, Robert, you disobeyed, he said lightly. I showed up, she corrected, sliding the coffee toward him. Those aren't the same. He smiled. You don't belong to this world. She shrugged. Neither do you. You just live in it. They sat in silence for a moment. You could leave, Robert said quietly. No one would stop you. Ruby looked around the café, the chipped mugs, the sticky counter, the place that had hidden her and taught her. I know, she said. And, he prompted. And I won't, she replied. Not yet. He didn't ask why. That night, Robert invited her to dinner. Not a demand, an invitation. She considered it longer than she should have. I don't want spectacle, she said. No power plays, no assumptions. Agreed, he said. Dinner was quiet, simple. No guards at the table. They talked not about plans or threats, but about loss, about responsibility, about the exhaustion of being watched. I've never had anyone tell me no, Robert admitted. Not honestly, Ruby smiled faintly. That explains a lot. He laughed, soft, real. Later, as they parted, he stopped her. I will not claim you, he said. Not publicly, Not privately, not ever. She met his eyes. Good, she said, because I don't want to be claimed. Something shifted then. Not ownership. Respect. The city adjusted. It always did. News cycles moved on. Names replaced names. Marco's fall became a cautionary footnote rather than a reckoning. The political campaign he'd funded quietly dissolved, citing internal restructuring. No one went to prison. No one made speeches about justice. But something fundamental had changed. Ruby could feel it in the way people spoke more carefully, in the contracts rewritten with less arrogance, in the sudden emphasis on compliance, transparency, restraint. Fear hadn't done that. Truth had. Robert's organization didn't expand after the exposure. It contracted, intentionally. He shut down operations that relied on exploitation rather than consent, cut ties with partners who thrived on chaos, replaced violence with leverage, intimidation with legality. Not out of redemption, out of precision. Ruby became something unnameable. Not an employee, not an advisor, not a shield. She reviewed, questioned, challenged. And when she said no, Robert listened. That alone unsettled everyone. "You're changing him," one man said quietly during a meeting. Ruby corrected him. "No, I'm removing excuses." She refused a salary. Instead, she negotiated debt forgiveness for families who'd been crushed quietly under old contracts. Medical bills erased, predatory loans voided. "This isn't charity," she told Robert. "It's repair." He agreed. When the offer came, it wasn't dramatic. A folder, across the table, control of a foundation, independent, fully funded, no oversight from him. "You can walk away now," Robert said. "With this." She closed the folder. "I'll walk away when I'm ready," she said. "And not because you made it comfortable." He nodded. That night, they stood on a balcony overlooking the city. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Speaking up?" She replied, "Yes." She shook her head. "I regret every time I didn't." He turned to her then, not towering, not powerful, just a man finally kneeling before truth. "Stay," he said, not as a command, as a request stripped bare. She considered him, the weight of what he was, what he could never undo. "I will," she said, "as long as I'm free." "You always will be," he replied. The final meeting came months later. Ruby stood before a room of men who once would have ignored her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This ends today," she said. "With dignity or with consequences you won't survive." They chose dignity. When Ruby returned to Bellini's one last time, she didn't wear an apron. She hugged the owner, left a generous tip, took nothing else. The cafe bell rang as she stepped into the street. The city moved around her, busy, indifferent, alive. Ruby Morales walked forward, not invisible, not owned, just free. Reflection. Power bows to truth only when someone refuses silence. And the bravest revolutions begin without shouting, just a voice that finally says, "No more." Peace never arrives without testing itself. Ruby sensed the shift before Robert did. It came as a pattern, small irregularities in reports, a delay in communications, a sudden absence of minor figures who were never important enough to notice before. Not threats, not violence, signals. She mentioned it over dinner one evening, her tone casual but precise. "Someone is probing," she said. "Not attacking, measuring." Robert's fork paused midair. "From where?" "Not inside," Ruby replied. "Not anymore. This feels external. Old power, the kind that doesn't forgive reform." Roberts. "Ghosts," Ruby corrected. "People who benefited from the old structure. You dismantled their certainty." He studied her. "What do you see?" "A test," she said. "They want to know if your restraint is weakness. And if it is, they'll move. Then we don't give them the answer they expect." The pressure escalated subtly, A warehouse inspection that arrived unannounced, a whistleblower complaint that cited outdated data, an attempted smear linking Ruby to Marco's dealings. That one made her laugh. They still don't understand, she said, handing Robert the article draft before it could be published. I don't need to be clean. I just need to be accurate. The response wasn't force. It was exposure. Ruby released documentation. Selective, surgical, demonstrating how rival interests had fueled the very corruption they now condemned. She didn't accuse. She contextualized. Within 48 hours, the pressure stopped. Not because they were afraid of Robert, because they were afraid of her clarity. That scared her more than any gun ever could. Reflection. Power bows to truth only when someone refuses silence, and the bravest revolutions begin without shouting. Just a voice that finally says, "No more." Peace never arrives without testing itself. Ruby sensed the shift before Robert did. It came as a pattern: small irregularities in reports, a delay in communications, a sudden absence of minor figures who were never important enough to notice before. Not threats, not violence, signals. She mentioned it over dinner one evening, her tone casual but precise. Someone is probing, she said, not attacking, measuring. Robert's fork paused midair. From where? Not inside, Ruby replied. Not anymore. This feels external. Old power. The kind that doesn't forgive reform. Roberts leaned back slowly. Rivals. Ghosts, Ruby corrected. People who benefited from the old structure? You dismantled their certainty. He studied her. What do you see? A test, she said. They want to know if your restraint is weakness. And if it is, they'll move. Then we don't give them the answer they expect. The pressure escalated subtly. A warehouse inspection that arrived unannounced. A whistleblower complaint that cited outdated data. An attempted smear linking Ruby to Marco's dealings. That one made her laugh. They still don't understand, she said, handing Robert the article draft before it could be published. I don't need to be clean. I just need to be accurate. The response wasn't force. It was exposure. Ruby released documentation, selective, surgical, demonstrating how rival interests had fueled the very corruption they now condemned. She didn't accuse. She contextualized. Within 48 hours, the pressure stopped. Not because they were afraid of Robert, because they were afraid of her clarity. That scared her more than any gun ever could. You've become a fixed point, Robert told her one night. People orient themselves around you. She shook her head. That's temporary. No, he said quietly. It's earned. The offer came again. This time, it was marriage. Not romantic, not dramatic. Strategic. A way to shield her, legitimize her authority. Anchor reform permanently. Robert presented it honestly. You don't owe me an answer, he said. Or anything at all. Ruby considered it carefully. I won't be used as armor, she said. Or symbol. I know. And I won't disappear into your world. I wouldn't want you to. She took a breath. Then the answer is no, she said. But not because I don't care. Robert absorbed it without flinching. That, he said, is exactly why I asked. Refusal did not weaken what Ruby and Robert had built. It clarified it. After the marriage offer dissolved into mutual understanding, something steadied between them. No unspoken expectations, no looming symbolism. Just two people aligned by choice, not leverage. That was rare and dangerous, because the final threat didn't come from rivals or remnants of the old guard. It came from the system itself. A federal task force announced a broad investigation, wide enough to look impartial, precise enough to aim directly at Robert's remaining structure. The language was careful. The timing was not. Ruby read the announcement twice, then a third time. This isn't about justice, she said. It's about control. Robert nodded. They don't like independent reform. They prefer collapse they can manage. They're forcing a binary, Ruby said. You fall or you become theirs." Silence followed. Then Robert did something unexpected. He handed Ruby a sealed envelope. "If this goes wrong," he said, "you leave. Everything you need is in here. New life, clean break." She didn't open it. "You still don't understand," she said gently. "I don't leave when things get dangerous. I leave when things get dishonest." He searched her face. "And now?" she said, "we speak first." They didn't wait for subpoenas. They requested them. Ruby drafted a voluntary disclosure. Comprehensive, brutal, precise. Every reform, every shutdown, every historical wrongdoing that could be proven without collateral harm. Robert signed it without edits. "Once this is out," he said, "I lose control." "You gain legitimacy," Ruby replied. Control was never sustainable. The hearings were public, televised, unforgiving. Robert answered questions plainly. No deflection, no threats, no legal theater. When Ruby was called to testify, the room changed. They expected a shield. They got a mirror. "I am not here to defend him," she said calmly. "I'm here to document a transformation you didn't believe was possible, because it didn't come from fear." A senator scoffed. "You expect us to applaud a criminal for reforming himself?" Ruby met his gaze. "No, I expect you to acknowledge that systems survive by adapting, or they rot pretending they're moral." The feed went silent. Public opinion shifted, not in Robert's favor, but toward complexity. That mattered. In the end, the ruling was unprecedented. Robert retained conditional control under oversight. Assets tied to violence were seized. The foundation Ruby oversaw became legally autonomous, protected from him and from the state. No victory, no destruction, just transformation. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, Robert turned to Ruby. "You could have been anything," he said. "Why this?" She thought of Bellini's, of the espresso cup, of silence, because someone had to stand in the middle, she said, and refuse extremes. That night, Ruby walked home alone. No guards, no escort. The city felt lighter, not safer, honest. Time softened what crisis had sharpened, not erased, softened. The headlines moved on, as they always did. New villains, new scandals, new outrage calibrated for attention rather than understanding. Robert's name appeared less often, usually buried beneath phrases like restructured leadership or conditional oversight. Ruby preferred it that way. She moved offices, not upward, but outward. A modest space above a bookstore, light-filled, quiet. The foundation bore no grand title. No donor wall, no portraits. Just work. She hired carefully. People who asked difficult questions. People who had been overlooked. Former clerks. Analysts who'd been ignored because they weren't loud. Nurses who understood systems better than executives ever could. They dismantled debt structures, audited exploitative contracts, returned property through legal precision rather than spectacle. Robert never interfered. He asked once if she needed more funding. She said no. That answer pleased him more than agreement ever could. They saw each other less, but when they did, it was intentional. One evening, they walked along the river, neither speaking for a while. "You could have taken more," Robert said eventually. She smiled faintly. "So could you." "I still could," he said. "But you won't." He looked at her. "Why are you so sure?" "Because power that's been questioned," Ruby said, "never feels the same again." He considered that. "Do you ever miss being invisible?" he asked. She thought of Bellini's, of the quiet, of the safety of being underestimated. "No," she said. "But I protect others who still need it." He nodded. They stopped at the railing. "I don't regret loving you," Robert said softly. She turned to him, not startled, not overwhelmed. "I know," she replied, "and I don't regret being worthy of that respect." They stood there as equals. No vows, no ownership, just truth acknowledged. Later that week, Ruby returned to Bellini's café. not as a customer. As a neighbor, she ordered espresso, sat at the counter. A new waitress served her young, nervous, observant. "First week?" Ruby asked. The woman nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "You're doing fine." The bell rang. A man entered the cafe. Not powerful, not dangerous. Just human. Ruby watched the city through the window. Present, grounded, invisible no longer, but never loud. Ruby never returned to being unseen. But she never became untouchable either. That was the balance she protected most fiercely. The foundation outlived the attention that birthed it. That was the true measure of its success. No single donor could claim it. No single scandal could unravel it. It existed in margins, in contracts rewritten and families no longer crushed by interest they never agreed to, in silence that finally meant peace instead of fear. Ruby kept her life small on purpose. A modest apartment with sunlight in the mornings, books stacked wherever they fit, dinners cooked slowly, without urgency, friends who argued with her, colleagues who challenged her, no entourage, no mythology. Robert stepped further back as the years passed. Not disappeared, relinquished. He let others lead, others speak, others be visible. Oversight became routine rather than threat. One afternoon, he visited Ruby's office unannounced. She looked up from her desk. "You're late." He smiled. "You always hated punctuality myths." He handed her a thin folder. "My resignation," he said, "from everything that still bears my name." She didn't open it. "You're sure?" she asked. She studied him, older now, quieter, unarmored. "Then go live," she said. He nodded. At the door, he paused. "You were never meant to serve coffee forever," she smiled. "And you were never meant to rule it." They laughed, softly. That was the last time they stood in the same room. Years later, someone asked Ruby during a quiet panel discussion how she'd changed the balance of power without force. She answered simply, "I spoke when silence would have been convenient." The room fell still, not in awe, in recognition. That night, Ruby walked home alone through streets that once would have frightened her. They didn't now, not because danger was gone, but because she understood it. She unlocked her door, set her keys down, made tea, and sat by the window as the city moved, loud, imperfect, alive. No throne, no crown, just a woman who chose truth when it mattered. Final reflection. Power does not fall when challenged by force. It kneels when confronted by clarity. Silence is not humility, and choice, freely made, is the highest form of authority.